So Josh, I'm going to go to you first, but we're going to talk about some states that are stepping in over county municipality rulings. States are actively testing their authority over STRs, with some passing laws that preempt local restrictions and others debating tax and regulatory changes that directly affect hosts, platforms, property tax classification. So what are we seeing in some of these local municipalities where the states are coming in? Is it pro or against short-term rentals?
It goes both directions depending on the state and depending on what side of the aisle.
Oh, that's weird.
That statement, yeah, ironically, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things we talk about Vodyssey, our very first fundamental is right property, right location. And the right property, right location includes knowing your rules and regulations, right? If I'm buying a 30-year amortized product, I want to make sure that I'm good to go for the foreseeable future, right? So we're seeing, post-COVID, regulations come sweeping in from the county, municipality, HOA level, right? I'm not anti-regulations. I'm not necessarily pro-regulations, but I do think there's a place for business to operate. There's a place for businesses not to operate. And as people are navigating this, as it keeps going up the chain, so to speak, certain states are coming in. Some of the state STR bills that have recently passed are Idaho, and that's a statewide STR preemption law. Basically is a sweeping law limiting how cities and counties can regulate short-term rentals, requiring them to be treated the same as other residential uses, right? So you're no longer going to be, whether you want to call it discrimination or being singled out, essentially if you're running as a long-term rental or a short-term rental, your rules and regulations are relatively the same, right?
Wow.
Indiana has a ban on rental caps. They enacted a law prohibiting cities and counties from capping the number of residential rental properties, a change that will prevent local governments from restricting the density of short-term rentals. I have two sides of that. I think one, it's a big win for people who've been fighting for a little more freedom. I do think there could be some overarching long-term effects from that to where they may rein that back in down the road, just because at some point you may have, too many eggs in the basket, so to speak. But we'll see we'll keep an eye on that. Then
I would throw a contrarian view on that. I do think that a lot of these areas that are putting these bans and then removing them to saying, hey, listen, we're going to restrict how many short-term rentals are out there. The marketplace is going to regulate that very well, just naturally, right? When supply goes up, and the more supply there is, and if demand's not following that supply up, ultimately prices come down. Prices come down too much, all of a sudden investors are not as attracted to that area, so they start to leave. So supply starts to weed itself out. If you really look at these areas that put these short-term rental bans on it, they really are hurting the affordability for visitors and travelers to go in there, because when you have a closed market and you have no more competition coming in on the supply side, and you've got one of the licenses that are still available and nobody else can come in, well, all of a sudden it doesn't bode well for the consumer, because now the competition at the top, the supply says, we're the only game in town, so we can charge what we want, we can operate how we want, we can do all those things. So, a lot of these areas that have these regulations, in my opinion, just most of the time, just remove them, let the market decide. The market is very unforgiving, and it will naturally regulate that supply and demand, right? Because if I get way too much supply, prices are going to come way down. When they come way down, investors don't want to be in that game. That's good for the consumer though, right? The more options I have as a consumer, the more prices are going to be regulated. And I don't get, somebody that's saying, hey, listen, you can't come in here and I've got a ban on short-term rentals and we've got these 100 short-term rentals that are in here. They're the only people who can operate. Now all of a sudden the consumer gets hurt. And many of these areas, they tout themselves to be consumer advocates. Like, hey, we're going to do this to help rent control. We're going to do this to help prices. They actually hurt it. And it's crazy to me that a lot of these politicians don't go to basic economic classes and understand capitalism at its very core level, because the marketplace is unforgiving, and the marketplace will regulate itself, and it will regulate itself to get better products, better prices, better for the consumer. And then when it gets to be the point where the investor themselves can't make money, they will get out and they'll go somewhere else. So supply will regulate itself as well. And so anyways, didn't mean to interrupt you, because I want you to keep going on that. Idaho, our neighboring state here. I know it's a long way from South Carolina and Texas, but Idaho's right next to us in Utah. I love what they did, and just said, hey, listen, you got to treat them like every other property. If you can rent it, you can rent it.
Right. And I think, it's you know, I'm involved with my neighborhood, my primary HOA. I'm the president, right? And I'm also involved with my rentals HOA because I make money there, right? And I want to be part of that. And I'm okay at the neighborhood level and the small level saying, hey, that this isn't allowed here or this is
Yep.
allowed here, right? Because it affects who do you want to live there? Do you want to live there? But as that radius gets further and further out, right? Like at what point are you overstepping on my property rights as an owner? Right. And I think it's a
Yeah.
big piece. And if you look at all the STR bills recently that have failed, Arizona, Colorado, Maine, New Mexico, Washington State, pending bills in Hawaii, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, Ohio, and then one, if I have a second, John, to vent about it, is my home state, South Carolina.